Well, hello, and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie, and today we are talking to you about some absolutely thrilling fights. And because I'm insecure, I made that sound like it was ironic, but it's not. There are two fights on the upcoming UFC 237, two fights that I am positively jazzed about, and those are the main event. Rose Namajunas defends the women's strawweight title she took from Joanna Jędrzejczyk and then defended against Jessica Andrade, whom, if you have listened to this show for a while now, you'll probably know that at least I have spent probably the last 2 years occasionally mentioning that Andrade is maybe the messiest matchup in the division for Rose. So that's obviously a fascinating style matchup. Then we're going to talk about the fight that really should be the co-main event. Of course, the official co-main event of 237 is Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva. But the people's co-main event is Jose Aldo versus Alexander Volkanovski, the greatest featherweight of all time, against possibly the most exciting up-and-coming featherweight right now, the most exciting contender. So we're going to start off with those two. We'll see what time we have to get to from the rest of this card after that. But let's hit the big stuff first, Phil. Rose Namajunas, Jessica Andrade, Jose Aldo, Alexander Volkanovski. I don't give a shit what the rest of the card looks like. What's not to like about those two fights?
Yeah, this has got to be... I mean, women's strawweight is one of the best divisions around at the moment, in that it's not only got a tremendous kind of pipeline of talent coming into it, it's not only got, really interesting up-and-comers, but it's actually being defended against the most exciting challenger, and it should be a really great fight. I mean, what is not to love about this fight? Mm-hmm. Because we've seen Andrade go up to the top before and fall short, and then kind of go back to the drawing board and completely annihilate everyone in front of her in her quest to get another title shot. And then on the other hand, we've got Rose Namajunas, where there's a significant question there, which is that, she's faltered in front of lesser pressure fighters and lesser kind of physical specimens to Andrade in the past, most specifically Karolina Kowalkiewicz. And beyond that, there's the question that, she beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who is the greatest women's strawweight of all time, for what little that's worth. Not because Jędrzejczyk is not a very impressive fighter, but just because the division hasn't existed for very long. But it's got to be one of those questions where, is this a Dominic Cruz-Cody Garbrandt situation? She's had incredibly impressive performances against Jędrzejczyk, but is her style very specifically designed to beat Jędrzejczyk and perhaps not do as well against all the other people in the division? So it is, and, beyond that, there's just the fact that these are two incredible action fighters who always put on thrilling fights. I mean, what is not to love about this? Yeah,
absolutely. Couldn't agree more across the board with all those statements, especially that, women's strawweight rules. Anyone who's not enjoying this division, basically since it came to the UFC, since that season of The Ultimate Fighter, this has been one of my favorite divisions to watch. And both of these women are extremely positive examples of that fact. I have never been bored by either a Jessica Andrade or Rose Namajunas fight. More than that, Andrade is essentially the John Lineker of this division. She's just a physical force. But Rose Namajunas, it has been really, really fun to me, and my particular style of fight fandom, to watch her develop. No matter how well her style became well-tuned to beat someone like Joanna Jędrzejczyk, I'm very confident she would have lost that fight back when she was first starting to get hype. It took her a while, and but she really has become this technical, intelligent, powerful boxer that you wouldn't really have expected that, seeing her first UFC fight against Carla Esparza. So very excited about this matchup. Before we get into the particulars, you said before something that piqued my interest. Jessica Andrade went back to the drawing board. Do you think she did really?
No, only in the most metaphorical sense. She doesn't really strike me as a different fighter in any way.
Yeah, she's very much... I don't know. Is it fair to call John Lineker an IQ test kind of fighter? Like,
I think he's still a deeper and more coherent fighter than Andrade is.
I would agree. What John Lineker did in the third round to adjust to Corey Sandhagen, I have never seen Jessica Andrade do something like that. She tends to just hit the punch button and then hit it harder.
Yeah, he is actually a pretty effective pressure fighter when he's not just doing the swing big hooks things. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Jessica Andrade really is just pretty much just a incredibly tough, incredibly hard-hitting, powerful physical force.
Yeah. And to go with that, something we did learn positive about her from her contest with Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Of course, she didn't look good. She got absolutely chewed up, never made a single adjustment. And it's fine. It's Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She's the best in this division ever so far, for whatever that means. That's the truth. But one thing we did learn that you cannot fault Andrade for, and something that I think should be of considerable concern to Namajunas in this matchup, is that her conditioning is insanely good. For somebody
Yeah, absolutely absurdly good.
For someone who literally just runs after their opponent, throwing nothing but full power shots, muscling through takedowns, everything is like full physical exertion. She does not seem to slow down to any significant degree.
I think the fifth round was her best round in that fight.
Yeah, you're probably right.
She'd just been getting shit kicked for the entire first four. Just eating body kicks, straight kicks, jabs, and she managed to slow down Joanna Jędrzejczyk by just getting beaten up by her. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is one of the most physically impressive things I've ever seen someone do in this sport in a very weird way.
Yeah. So let's talk about the matchup, because as I already said, for a while now, I have had this sort of pegged as the tough one for Rose Namajunas. If you have look at her fight with Karolina Kowalkiewicz, look at how physically depleted she became from tying up. Look how much trouble she had in the clinch with Tisha Torres in their fight. And then you compound that with, for example, in her only 5-round fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she definitely started to fade. She dug deep and found the power again in the 5th round, but even when she does not have a Karolina Kowalkiewicz kneeing her in the gut a dozen times per round, she does seem to lose some steam. For as much as she's improved technically and as much discipline as she has gained, she's still a very dynamic fighter. She still tends to kind of bound into her shots. She's light in her feet in a way that means she's always like leaping around. She does not conserve energy all that easily. Not like someone like Joanna Jędrzejczyk can. So is there, give me a reason to think she could win. Phil, give me a reason. What has she learned over time, that maybe equips her to handle the just aggression and physicality that Andrade brings to the table?
So I think there's a couple of things worth thinking about here. So firstly, I think that idea of Rose slowing down over time, I think that's very true. And that's something that she's had throughout her career, is that she's tended to, she's always been an incredibly fast starter, incredibly dangerous early on, and has kind of struggled as the fight goes on. What I found really fascinating about her fight with Jędrzejczyk is that it was such a clearly defined matchup of quick starter slows down late versus slow starter who picks up the pace. Mm-hmm. And, we've often talked about how fighters never really get away from their flaws, but they have to like necessarily recontextualize them. So we talked about things like Alistair Overeem as someone who would, who needed to be in control and did that by generating more of a kind of outfighting style. And this one represented to me like this was her recontextualizing her style in time in a kind of way, because it wasn't the narrative of the fight was still kind of Rose starts off quick and then slows down, and Joanna starts off slow and then catches up. That was admittedly kind of the narrative of the fight, but it was also the narrative of every round. Pretty much. It was the fact that Rose was able to build up like large, often like semi-insurmountable leads in the first 2 or 3 minutes, and then Joanna would be kind of surging down the last minute of the rounds. And this happened like multiple times throughout that fight. Mm-hmm. And I've always found that to be like, it's one of the really like impressive examples of someone changing what seems like it'll be a permanent crippling flaw into something which is just, something you can work around. So
for whatever reason, I'm thinking of Yoel Romero just postponing when he actually started fighting in his rematch with Robert Whittaker.
Yeah.
Like just finding a way to have the same limitations but turn them into a strength in a weird, unexpected kind of way. You're right. She's not just it's like I think that speaks to the discipline and the technical discipline that she has gained. That she's no longer needlessly wasting energy. The idea of starting fast and fading is still sort of baked into the way she fights, probably the way she reacts to the action in the cage emotionally, how invested she becomes in what she's doing. But having the technical basis to get tired and still fight in a more energy efficient way allows her to have essentially multiple fast starts throughout the fight. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yep. So that's one of the. I think that's one of the things to consider. The second is we've talked about kind of footwork in the context of guys like Pettis and JDS before, in that footwork is footwork, meaning that these guys have been characterized as fighters where all you had to do was push them backwards and they'd be in serious trouble. And then we saw them against dedicated outfighters, as in Max Holloway's performance against Pettis and Overeem against JDS, and they looked similarly bad.
Barboza against
Gustafsson, or Gustafsson Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you realize, hey, Gustafsson's sloppy footwork when he's on the retreat means that he's pretty bad at closing people down as well. And Jessica Andrade does not have footwork.
No.
She just follows people around. And there were, whilst I think Rose's footwork is, it works best as offense, just setting up like tricky angles to come in with that left hook or setting up her jab. She did have multiple occasions where Joanna was trying to push her backwards, and Joanna was on the march and couldn't get in on her. Mm-hmm. I think that she can replicate a lot of what Joanna did. I think there will be large, unless Jessica can really crush her in some way. There will be large portions of this fight of Jessica just kind of plodding after Rose, just getting punched in the face.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. And even in her, and this is maybe a damning with faint praise kind of thing. Even in the matchups where she has shown the weakness to the pressure, she has shown nice evasive footwork and counters. For the first round of her fight against Karolina Kowalkiewicz, and then for significant moments in the beginning of the second round, but especially in the third, before, she just got dragged into a brawl and taken down and beaten up on the ground, she was showing really nice evasive footwork. And Kowalkiewicz doesn't have great footwork, but it's probably still better than Andrade's. She does have some concept of angles. some concept of, I don't know, cutting off the cage. Does she? Probably not. But still, it's at least on a par. Yeah, I agree. Like, Namajunas has good footwork, I would say. She's does a remarkably good job of keeping herself in position behind her jab or behind her left hook. She has a really uncanny ability to throw a combination, like as a counter, and then the opponent goes streaming past her, and without really having to move her feet much, she can continue the combination and just sort of retarget where she's aiming her punches, sort of shifting in and out of a normal stance. Here's the thing, though. I'm gonna counter these improvements of Rose's, and put them back into the context of why I don't think she can evade for long the kind of fight that Andrade wants to have with her. When I first watched her fight with Volkanovski, I was essentially screaming at the TV, "Why does she keep clinching?" Because after the first round, she started to have problems in the clinch. That shit started early, and Trevor Whitman knew that and was advising her how to fight. Watching it this most recent time, I was sort of struck by a mechanical limitation of the way that Rose throws her punches, the way that she leverages her body weight into her shots. I think she had a hard time stopping Volkanovski from colliding with her, because basically anytime she would plant her feet, again, there's this really sort of lunging, dynamic way that she flings her body weight into her shots, and it takes away from some of her foot speed. You know, she really does have to, she's got considerable power. I think we've seen that on a few occasions now. She can really crack, but it takes away from her ability to move after a shot. And she ends up, even in performances where she's looking good, in a lot of these exchanges where she'll land a good shot and then just sort of have to hunch her head down and cover up and sort of awkwardly crab walk her way out of the pocket. And against Volkanovski, an opponent who quickly picked up on the fact that she had a huge advantage whenever they were tied up, something that I'm still not sure Rose has managed to change. She's just not that physically imposing when you're locked up with her. And certainly, if that was the case against Carolina, even if she's improved in that regard, is not going to be the case against Andrade. So my question is, can she avoid... Now, Andrade is different in terms of tying up. She's not as much of a clinch fighter as Carolina, although she will certainly look to pick people up and slam them on the ground. But still, colliding with her, letting her get her hands on you, is dangerous. She will definitely grab a head, grab the neck with one hand and wail away with the other. She will definitely hit the body and just start winging, hooking combos. And Andrade is probably one of the few fighters in this division now who can not just afford to exchange with Rose, but will get the better of those exchanges. Because even if she loses them, Rose is most likely going to be slowing down from each exchange. She's going to feel those exchanges later in a way that Andrade never seems to.
Yeah, I'm pretty much going to agree with most of that, or pretty much all of it. And I'm going to add a couple of points to it as well, is that, the clinch is really a bit of a danger zone. I mean, a significant one here, because the clinch was really the area where Rose lost the most consistently against Jędrzejczyk.
If only Joanna could have forced that clinch more. Why, Joanna, why? But yes.
And secondly, it was actually a very useful safety valve for Jędrzejczyk again in her fight against Andrade, is that she was able to kind of Cheeto Vera her way out of pressure. And she could lock up a kind of a collar tie and then elbow knee, and then also, just control Andrade's posture to push her away. And that's not going to be open to, that's not necessarily going to be open to Rose. So I agree with those takes in general. I will say that I'll give Rose some, I'll give Rose some leeway on the whole, Kowalkiewicz thing, because I think she's a very game plan dependent fighter. Mm-hmm. I think she's extremely coachable. I think, she doesn't strike you as someone who has a lot of confidence in herself, but she's someone who pays a lot of attention to what her coaches are saying.
Yeah.
And I genuinely don't think, the narrative in this particular fight was that going into it was that Kowalkiewicz would probably have the advantage on the feet, but that Rose was going to destroy her in the clinch, because that's kind of what Rose was at the time. She was a clinch wrestler and kind of head kick and submissions girl.
Yeah, she had just very recently out-clinched Paige Van Zandt. Used that phase to ragdoll her to the ground and out-grapple her. So,
yeah. So I just think they trained a lot of getting into the clinch and a lot of, and I think in this fight they're going to have, I think they're going to have a much, well, as we said, Andrade is. She definitely is an IQ test fighter.
She's an extremely straightforward challenge.
Yeah. I don't think there's going to be there's no subtleties and hidden things which are going to be coming out from Andrade.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think I'm going to go with Rose. And I do that I take that pick with a great deal of trepidation and understand that I think, a lot of people that I respect a lot, including, I think, Schwam might have picked Andrade. I'm not sure. Schwan Hughes, Black Jordan Breen on Twitter. Everyone should follow him. He's an amazing resource for women's mixed martial arts analysis in particular. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I think that I've just been really impressed by how well Trevor Whitman and Rose have managed to kind of build consistent game plans since that Kowalkiewicz fight. And it was just how plodding Andrade was against Jędrzejczyk. It was how, I didn't think Andrade was a technical marvel before that fight, but it was just how, how little adjustment she made as she just followed Jędrzejczyk around the cage.
Yeah.
So I think Rose will definitely get into trouble, but I think she can build up kind of significant leads in rounds, and maybe, similar to the Jędrzejczyk kind of dynamic, maybe get into trouble towards the end of them, but manage to, I think she's going to drop at least she's going to drop 1 or 2 rounds, but I think she'll just build up such a major lead that she can afford that. So again, major trepidation, but I'm going to take Rose.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think if this fight had happened a few months ago, I might have agreed with you, because I sort of went away from, as it is, I'm a dumb animal. I have my what have you done for me lately feeling when it comes to fighters. And so watching Rose beat Joanna, whom I have tremendous respect for as a fighter, a little MMA math probably happening subconsciously, whose Joanna's performance over Andrade was so very complete and impressive, left no doubt as to who got the better of basically every round in that fight. I was starting to think, okay, maybe Rose has improved enough to an extent. I'm going to lean on your classic wisdom, though, Phil, of style matchups never change. Cue the Fallout guy voice. Styles never change. I don't think, as much as I like Rose, the idea of Rose having a good start in each round, what constitutes an insurmountable lead in a given round against someone like Jędrzejczyk is stepping in and landing big punches on her and doing that to Andrade. Like, that's something that Joanna did not do to Andrade because she could not afford to do it. I think just by the nature of the way that Rose leverages her weight into her shots, the way that she plants to throw her punches, if she is going to have a strong start against Andrade, I think it will then invite the way that Andrade manages to finish that round strongly. And the really big thing is, I just don't trust Rose's stamina to hold up against someone who, as far as I can tell, does not get tired, especially someone who, while they're not getting tired, really does a good job of working the body and is really, really exhausting to tie up with. So I see Andrade basically suffering some bad exchanges, almost certainly spending 2 very bad rounds, walking into jabs and counters, but eventually turning those good moments of Rose's into good moments for her, inviting the exchanges in which she gets hit, because it turns out it doesn't matter if she gets hit if she can start hitting Rose back more and more often as the fight goes on. So I'm taking Andrade here. I don't like it. I love Thug Rose. She's my girl. I'd really like to see her win, but logically, and this is not a sadness hedge, logically, I feel I have to pick Andrade. All right, and let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to talk about the true co-main event of this card, UFC 237. Again, that is the former featherweight champion and still featherweight GOAT. Jose Aldo is fighting Alexander Volkanovski, fresh off of Volkanovski's win over Chad Mendes. Very impressive, and this one should be thrilling. After that, we'll get to whatever else from UFC 237 sounds good to us before moving on to recapping last week's action, especially the main event, Ally Quinta versus Cowboy Cerrone. All of that after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are talking about the People's co-main event, and by the People's, I mean the only people I care about, me. For me, Jose Aldo versus Alexander Volkanovski is far and away the second most, if not the most interesting fight on this card. And by gum, Phil, let's talk about it. I am very nervous for Jose Aldo. I'm sure no one is surprised to hear that, least of all you. But I'm so close to sadness hedging. I need you to save me.
I am also very close to sadness hedging.
Yeah.
So here's a hypothetical for you. What if you took both Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes over the last few years, and you said, okay, I want a hypothetical version of this character, of this guy, that he can just deliver a single burst of hyper-violent offense, and then he's pretty much done. What would that version of Alexander... Because I'm going to argue that version of Chad Mendes would have looked much like the one that we saw. And I would argue that we haven't really seen anything from Jose Aldo to indicate that he's not that guy either. Because, you know, we saw Mendes come back, for example. He just wiped out Miles Jury in, you know, the first major exchange. And then that was sort of enough for us to say, okay, like, yeah, maybe Chad Mendes is back. And then he fought Alexander Volkanovski, and he did not look back. Like, he did not look like Chad Mendes, really. I mean, he looked like Chad Mendes at the beginning, and he had a single huge burst of offense, which hurt Alexander Volkanovski pretty badly. But then he was sort of done after that. And this has sort of been the narrative of Jose Aldo's career since those Holloway fights, is that he's landed one giant burst of violence, and it's just finished the fucking fight. So the main problem in the Holloway fights was that, you know, it looked like Jose Aldo just couldn't take a pace anymore. And whilst Max Holloway's pace is, you know, something truly unreal.
Yes.
Yeah. Those fights weren't insanely high paced. They weren't like a championship fighter should be pretty much done after 2 rounds paced. especially not at featherweight.
Right. And it all just has to do with just the way that Jose Aldo throws. Like, even, I went back, recently in preparation for this. I rewatched his last 2 fights, one with Jeremy Stephens, one with Renato Moicano. You are absolutely right. And that's the reason why when this fight, Volkanovski Aldo, was first announced, I was immediately intensely nervous for my beloved Junior Aldo, because while great performances that show off like some of the aspects of Aldo as a fighter that people sort of forgot during his championship reign, namely that he is an absolutely devastating striker. He's maybe one of the hardest hitters in this entire division. And he coupled those bursts of insane offense with the defense that has really developed in the later stage of his career. So he's still an improved version of just full on power punching, first round finish Jose Aldo. You're right. Those fights didn't test much. It's unfair to say, I don't think this is what you were saying, that he has just one burst of offense in him. Not literally one, because he did, when he got very slightly shaken up by Jeremy Stephens. And if you still think that Jeremy Stephens badly hurt Jose Aldo, I want you to go back and rewatch that fight again, because it didn't happen. He put Aldo on the defensive. But Aldo managed to fight his way out of that corner, then got into his rhythm, and then he finished Jeremy Stephens with the big burst of offense. So he did have a bit of a back-and-forth fight with Stephens. And then against Renato Moicano, he basically had the first round he had against Max Holloway. Just like landed some big shots, took a few jabs, but pretty much got the better of the early going, and then stormed out and flattened Moicano in the second round. But none of that suggests that he can none of that suggests that he will not share the fate that Mendes experienced against Volkanovski, which is have a competitive first round, hurt Volkanovski, immediately start getting hurt in return, and then fall apart. Now, I will say this. We have yet to see, outside of the Holloway fights, an example of what I think we saw in the Mendes-Volkanovski fight, which is sort of Mendes having Vietnam-esque flashbacks to the most poignant points in his career when he gassed out and was subsequently taken apart. But I think those Holloway fights are that memory now for Jose Aldo. So while we haven't seen, what I'm trying to say is, I think Aldo, and this is not to disparage Chad Mendes, I think Aldo has more of what we would normally call heart than Chad Mendes. And we have seen that, for example, in his second fight with Chad Mendes, where he got dropped in the first round, got hurt later in the third round, and each time just smashed the man who dared to hurt him. Really, really reasserted his control, his dominance over the fight. And that's kind of been the defining characteristic of Jose Aldo's whole career, is that he has stayed very hungry. He has stayed with this very scrappy attitude. But now he's had 2 fights against someone whose main weapon against him is pace, or at least, his ability to make Aldo fight back longer than he is actually capable of comfortably fighting back, and lost the same way, almost exactly the same way, twice. And so if Volkanovski can have a similar fight to the one he had with Mendes, does Aldo now have that seed of doubt planted in his mind, where the pace starts to pick up and he instantly remembers the last time he felt like this, and then it all starts to fall apart mentally? Is it possible that Jose Aldo can fall apart mentally?
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with all that. I think he's definitely tougher than Mendes. And we definitely saw that in the Volkanovski fight. You could see Volkanovski was kind of laughing shots off and coming in on Mendes, and Mendes was trying to do the same thing. He was trying to smile and say, "Oh yeah, we're having a great fight here, aren't we? Aren't we?" and you could just kind of see that it was not true.
Yeah.
He was
not true.
Visibly very worried.
The McGregor fight, Mendes has much more of a bully mentality. And Mendes seems like a very nice guy. Again, I'm not trying to disparage him. But Aldo really does have that in his soul. Even in the second Holloway fight, the man was fighting his heart out trying to win that back right until the very end. Even just when it was fighting to survive, as he was being beaten up on the ground, there is no quit in Jose Aldo at all. But, well, there was no quit in Jose Aldo. That's my main fear here.
Yeah, so let's talk Volkanovski, as a fighter, because we talked about Aldo. We talked about Aldo a lot. Mm-hmm. And what Volkanovski did in that Mendes fight was tremendously impressive. Mm-hmm. That he's shown an increasing ability to pressure behind a fairly limited, but still very dangerous game. It's basically a jab and I think a left kick to the body. Which is surprisingly crafty, I think, in terms of how he kind of throws the change up between those two different strikes, and off that he just kind of builds up into the left hook and the right hand. So the question is, I guess, how does he force exchanges with Jose Aldo?
Okay, well, to Volkanovski's credit, I would answer that by saying that he showed a new level of craftiness with his striking in that Mendes fight. Up to that point, it was really just that switch up that you talked about, and I always liked his switch up. He already had good cage cutting footwork. He was already a fighter who was not content to follow his opponent around, who would sidestep to stay in front of them, and he had very good tools, namely that left kick and the wide right hand, of trapping his opponent in front of him, of sort of corralling them into the corner. But against Mendes, he showed more than that. There was a lot more subtlety, there was a lot more nuance to how he was throwing. The number of techniques he was throwing was not vastly greater. It was all pretty much the same 3 or 4 staple moves. But his trickiness with rhythm and timing was apparent. The way that he would feint and play with the jab, his jab was much subtler than I recall ever seeing it before that fight. And do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely.
He was sort of pumping it. He would feint his way into range, and then without having to move his feet, just pop Mendes with the jab. He was just doing a much better job, essentially, with feints and with a whole manner of different tricky movements that had Mendes biting on counters when Volkanovski was still perfectly capable of sliding back out of range and then coming back. He still didn't show a lot of counter-punching ability, per se. In the exchanges, Mendes was definitely still landing the better counters. But if your concern is Aldo having the power drawn out of him by being forced to trade, Volkanovski showed some of that. He showed some of the ability to create exchanges that he doesn't really have to commit himself to. Risk-free exchanges, more or less. And then showed the ability to then start piling it on after the other person's fatigue starts to show. He also showed some nice body jabs. He showed a little more subtlety with that kind of stuff, which I liked. Here's the thing, though. How different would that fight have gone, do you think, if Chad Mendes would have hit the body 10% more? If Chad Mendes, because the one thing that Volkanovski that is definitely still very limited is his defense. And Mendes was making hay with that in the early going. I think when this fight first happened, you thought Mendes had was basically winning the whole fight, narrowly, but up until the finish was pretty much winning the whole thing. Is that still your read?
Yeah. I think so. That first round is really close.
It's very close.
I don't have a big call on it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. It's a very close round, though. And a lot of the reason for that, a lot of the really eye-catching shots, the initiating shots of the exchanges are Volkanovski's. But Mendes got a lot of work done firing looping right hands around Volkanovski's narrow double forearm guard as he was retreating in a sort of straight line. And both in terms of footwork and upper body defense, Volkanovski, I still don't know that I have seen his ability to survive exchanges with a devastating puncher truly tested, because Mendes did not show an awful lot of variety there. He was basically just overhand rights and left hooks. He threw one left hook to the body in the fight that I can recall, and it landed hard. And that is something that Jose Aldo does very well. Jabs to the body, left hooks to the body, wide right hands to the body. In addition to that, he's very clever with uppercuts and throws excellent combinations. Now, you can fault the way he throws those combinations, the fact that he still doesn't really vary the rhythm of his shots, that he pretty much throws full power on everything. But Volkanovski has not shown yet the subtlety of defense to deal with even a pretty straightforward combination puncher, someone who at least knows to vary the angles and targets of their attacks. So how different would that Mendes fight, if we're projecting a similar fate for Aldo, how different would that fight have been if Mendes just made a few tactical changes?
Yeah, it was, and even then, how different would that fight have been if Mendes was just a bit more physically present? Like, I still think that there's a significant, there's a significant factor of Mendes just kind of being
more willing to back the other guy up, to stand his ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he just kind of didn't want to be in there anymore. He wasn't as hungry as he was before. So yeah, I can co-sign that. I have another thing to kind of bring up, which is, how much have we really seen of, how good have we seen Volkanovski's striking look in open space? Because I've been thinking of this in context of like Kamaru Usman, for example. Mm-hmm. That Kamaru Usman is a increasingly kind of decent striker, mm-hmm. but I cannot think of times when I've seen Kamaru Usman hitting people when they weren't up against the cage.
Yeah.
So, and this is obviously because, in the kind of inverse Tyron Woodley dynamic, it's much easier to do things like measuring distance when the other guy can't move backwards anymore. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of a question for me, is that how Volkanovski is a good pressure fighter, and Mendes, as a natural counter fighter, sort of obliged him by backing up and circling away and looking to find his counters, and put himself into the cage, pretty much for the entire fight, mm-hmm. Which was very competitive up until Volkanovski started hurting him and eventually put him away. Mm-hmm. But has anyone ever forced Jose Aldo into the cage with any consistency at all?
Only by wrestling him. Only Kenny Florian by shooting 1,000 unsuccessful takedowns that I can recall.
Okay.
Right.
That might be an interesting dynamic then. So what if Volkanovski made his bones as a wrestler? Can he dive in on the single leg and force just try and do the thing where he just bum rushes Aldo back to the fence, like Khabib and Usman style?
Yeah, it didn't work that well for Kenny Florian.
Yeah, but he's Kenny Florian.
Yeah, to be fair, he's
physically tremendously underwhelming.
Yeah, but he did just get shucked off. I mean, who has ever out-wrestled Jose Aldo?
Yeah.
No one.
More than that, even people who have tried, has anyone just with their striking managed to consistently push him into the cage? And these include, Jeremy Stevens managed to push him there very, very briefly. Mm-hmm. Max Holloway, Max Holloway beat him. Max Holloway beat him, but the vast majority of the fight was in open space.
Yeah.
He didn't manage to force him back into the cage much at all.
No. It's and this is the thing that I wanted to raise as well. Part of this has triggered some irritation in me because people were talking about footwork. I can't remember. Oh, it was there was a post from Dominic Cruz on Twitter where he was drilling. He was drilling footwork, and I genuinely think there's value to drilling footwork the way he was doing it. Like, it was a lot of these little tricky, feint steps and misdirections, and really just focusing on being agile and having your feet always ready to transfer your weight, never too committed to one foot or the other. Dominic Cruz, in a lot of respects, genuinely has very good footwork. But the point was raised, perhaps by Lucas Bourdon, that, something we've talked about on this show quite a bit, both now and in the Patrick Wyman era, moving a lot does not equal good footwork. And this is a mistake that is made far too often in MMA, going back to the early days of Frankie Edgar, where now Frankie Edgar moves less and has substantially, objectively better footwork than he used to. But he used to get praised for his footwork when he would just constantly flit around the ring. Was just constantly moving and wasting energy. And so I'm getting way off track here. Basically, the topic was raised, who has the best footwork in MMA right now? And people were like, well, Max Holloway's got great footwork. Stephen Thompson's got great footwork. And I was very upset, Phil. No one even mentioned Jose Aldo's name. And Jose Aldo still has maybe the best footwork in the sport. Look at his second fight with Frankie Edgar. Watch that fucking shit. He is really, really hard to track down when he is committed to evading his opponent. Watch his fight with Kenny Florian. He is a remarkably good pivoter. You know, he does it to this day, better than anyone else in the sport. No one pivots as smoothly or as effectively or as efficiently as Jose Aldo. As much as you can knock the inefficiency of his offense, his footwork is remarkably efficient and does not require any energy. He could do another 5 rounds of what he did to Frankie Edgar all over again. He wasn't tired at all by the end of that fight, because that kind of stuff is easy for him. So the more of that he can do against someone like Volkanovski, the better. And I do have an example of a time that somebody fought Volkanovski in open space. It was Mizuto Hirota, who staged a surprisingly competitive fight with Volkanovski. Basically, once he realized that he had to plant his feet, he did have to fight Volkanovski off a little bit, but once he realized he had to stand his ground and back Volkanovski off, he was then able to move around him a little in open space, and he won a lot of those exchanges. So, yeah, I don't know. Volkanovski's maybe one of the better has some of the better pressure footwork that Aldo has had to face. Because a lot of the guys he spent his early career outmaneuvering didn't really know how to cut off the octagon all that well. But this ain't a boxing ring. It's still the octagon. The opportunity is there, no matter how good your footwork is, for someone to use that space to their advantage. So I guess I'm talking myself into picking Jose Aldo.
Yeah, I think I've done that too.
I tell you how nervous that makes me. But, you know, like, I still, even in the second fight against Holloway, and maybe that second fight is the one that does it, I have not seen Jose Aldo fold under pressure. I have seen him suffer physically in similar ways to Mendes, but I have not seen him fold under pressure. And as much new striking subtlety as Volkanovski showed, I still don't really know if he can close down the distance consistently on Jose Aldo, especially with his rudimentary defense. I think there's an opportunity for Aldo's stand and bang to scare you off tactic to work. Because it worked for Mendes until Mendes mentally shattered. It was working. To the extent that I think Aldo will need it to. So, and it's a 3-round fight. Which, that feels good for my boy Aldo.
3 rounds. Yeah, 3 rounds I think is quite significant.
Mm-hmm.
If it was 5, I would be much, much more scared.
Yeah, even though Volkanovski's never been there, Volkanovski's style seems like a recipe for gaining speed. You know, he's a very consistent, and with his offense, a very efficient fighter as well. But 3 rounds, is that enough time for Aldo to... Is that enough time for Volkanovski to draw all the energy out of Jose Aldo? I don't know. It took Max Holloway 3 rounds, and that's a Max Holloway pace with Max Holloway reach. It's a different story. So I think I'm picking the GOAT.
It's got to be done.
All right. Well, now I'm scared. So let's change topics and take another break. When we come back, we are going to get into, I don't know, what is it, Phil? Do we want to talk about Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva? I suppose we should.
I guess.
There's that. Isn't it good, folks, that you get to, in MMA, you get to live long enough to see your legends getting fed to fighters that, like, literally no one even knows about? Like, it's a completely meaningless loss for your once favorite, all-time great type of fighter. So we'll talk about that. Also, I think the other appealing fight on this card, Francisco Trinaldo versus Carlos Diego Ferreira, sounds like a damn good time. So I think we'll try and touch on both of those and then cover whatever we can with the time remaining from Iaquinta versus Cerrone after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right, welcome back to Heavy Hands, everyone. Segment 3, we've talked about all the good shit, so we're really going to be phoning it in for this segment. No, just kidding. We're talking about Jared Cannonier versus Anderson Silva. Phil?
This is a referendum on how old Anderson Silva is. And if he wasn't super old, he would win this fight easily. And maybe he is super old, but I'm going to pick him anyway, just because I don't trust Jared Cannonier at all.
Wow, yeah. I think I'm going to pick him too, actually.
Yep.
Very weird, right?
I mean, he looked so bad against Dominic Reyes. And he wasn't really winning that fight against David Branch either.
No.
He was just much more powerful than him, but Anderson's still pretty tricky and hard to hit, and I don't think you're going to get it done with single leg kicks.
Yeah, it's basically, I mean, the Dominic Reyes fight, yeah. Remember Cannonier's fight with Jan Blachowicz?
Mm-hmm.
He spent, like, that was basically the best, most consistent footwork he's ever faced. And he spent the entire fight, like, getting increasingly mad at himself while just slowly following Jan Blachowicz around. He did not know how to deal with that footwork. And I have yet to see any evidence that he's improved that aspect of his game. Even when he fought Iwan Kutalaba, he was just sort of lumbering after him, and Kutalaba started to slow down because he's a maniac who throws nothing but full power shots as a 230-pound man, and slowed down, and Cannonier started to basically build on him as he got given the chance to spend more and more time in range. As long as Anderson can keep moving on the outside, can keep cutting angles, can keep that jab out there, I'm still not really convinced he can do that. You know, like, Anderson's definitely had his stamina issues. And if Cannonier is just tough and just walks him down over and over, he very likely might still, because Cannonier seems to hit really hard. And Anderson survived a lot of shots, a lot of clean shots from Israel Adesanya. And Adesanya's a much sharper puncher than Jared Cannonier, but he seems like a much less powerful one as well. I don't really... Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Anderson hasn't actually looked that chinny, surprisingly.
Yeah.
I mean, since he got knocked out by Weidman, he just hasn't really... He was knocked down by Bisping, but I can't remember, would he have won that Bisping fight if it had been 3 rounds? He might have done. I can't remember whether he won round 4 or 5.
No, I think he started to pick it up in 3.
Okay.
3 and 4 were his big, or maybe 4 and 5 were his big ones. I can't recall. 4 and 5. Yeah, I think you're right.
But, so, I mean, he beat Nick Diaz fairly easily. He looked okay against Bisping. He looked terrible against Cormier, but it was short notice, and he still hurt Cormier. And it's Daniel Cormier, it's not Jared Cannonier, and he looked fine against Adesanya and Brunson. He was still able to scare Brunson for what that's worth, and he's able to put quite a lot of respect into Adesanya as well. He can still hit, he can still move. Would it surprise me to see him just get completely overpowered and just clubbed unconscious? No. Will I judge anyone just for taking the big, powerful, durable with a slight kind of qualification athlete and Cannonier over the aging Silva? Not at all, but like I said, he's just looked so bad against basic range striking in from Reyes and Blachowicz that
basically
I just can't trust it.
Any time he has encountered good lateral movement, he has looked really flummoxed. And yeah, that's enough for me to pick an 3,000-year-old Anderson Silva to beat him. I don't feel comfortable about it. I'm very ready to be wrong.
No. Anyone listening to this, remember when we picked Shogun to beat Smith?
Shogun to beat... Oh, yeah, Anthony Smith. I was like, who? Which depressing Shogun fight was that? Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we're wrong. But I'll go to my grave.
This is the nostalgia episode, guys.
Yeah, I'll go to my grave proud of the fact that I did not pick Jared Cannonier to beat Anderson Silva. Maybe the real difference is going to be that, like, you know, most people Anderson fights, they share a sort of reverence and a sort of Christian reverence, you know, wouldn't you say? And Jared Cannonier, as you may well know, is a man of the Jewish faith. And the Jewish God is an angry, awful motherfucker. So maybe that's the difference, is that Cannonier just won't be cowed. Because definitely, I'm joking, but definitely a big part of the Adesanya thing was that Adesanya personally has a ton of respect for Anderson Silva. That may be the case for Cannonier, but Adesanya is exactly the type... Like, Adesanya was a kid who got into combat sports after watching Ong Bak, you know? Like, he's that kind of... My cultural heroes inspired me to do what I do today. And Anderson Silva is absolutely one of those people for him. I don't know if that's the case for Cannonier, and if sort of the tepid nature of Adesanya's offense in that fight at points was just because of how much respect he had for Anderson, that he didn't really want to hurt him. And it is genuinely possible that Cannonier will prove us wrong by just going out there and immediately cracking Anderson really hard on the chin with no second thoughts about how badly he's about to hurt this old man. So yeah, I'm prepared for that in my soul, but I'm still picking Andy. And with that, why don't we talk about the main card opener here, Francisco Trinaldo, Carlos Diego Ferreira. Interesting fight. How old is Francisco Trinaldo now? I have to know. 40. Jesus Christ.
Jesus.
Yeah, but still going. Style seemingly unchanged for the last 5 years. And in some ways, better longevity than he used to have when he was a man in merely his mid-30s.
Definitely.
He has improved in terms of his technique and his finesse. He's become much more efficient.
Yeah. So no question about that. I mean, he pretty much won, I believe, the third round against James Vick, despite losing the first two.
Yeah.
Or it was definitely his best round.
I think
can't really remember. But yeah, I literally never would have thought that was possible, given his previous experience of getting gassing out horribly and getting, what was it TKO'd or Kimmer'd by Michael Chiesa. But yeah, he's definitely improved. His late career renaissance has been something awesome to behold, as he's become this sort of slightly Overeem-esque outside kickboxer.
Yeah, going back to the Chad Laprise fight. He's a surprisingly crafty, surprisingly good footwork and surprisingly crafty counterpuncher. And to your point, it was a Kimura against... No, it was a decision loss to Michael Chiesa.
Oh,
he
really?
was Kimura'd by Piotr Hallman.
Ugh.
And by Yuri Alcantara. But those are the two only finished losses of his pro career.
Yuri Alcantara?
Yeah. Oh, actually, no, he got submitted by Kevin Lee, that's right. But he was also beating the shit out of Kevin Lee before that.
Man, Yuri has a weird career.
Yes, he does.
Okay, so Carlos Diego Ferreira. Another guy who's kind of surprised me a bit of late. That performance against Rustam Khabilov, probably the best of his career. Mm-hmm. And one that I think probably has me picking Ferreira. Because Khabilov kind of shares something with Master Nduba in that I think he is a bit of a neutralizer at heart. He wants to scare you off with a big shot and then give himself time to recover. And Ferreira did an amazing job of just staying on him. Mm-hmm. Just stayed on him the whole fight, put him under constant pressure. I mean, he didn't do a great job of tracking him down in any way, which may be an issue against Master Nduba, who is just, who is quite happy to just circle off and just set up the big left hand. But Yeah, I mean, I think I'm becoming a Carlos Diego Ferreira believer.
I've been a believer, man. He had some good moments in his fight with Dustin Poirier back in the day. He's one of those, he's, of a similar ilk to Trinaldo, where he's like, the moment he starts swinging, you're like, oh, this guy's a complete mess. But then you sort of watch a few of his fights and you're like, okay, there's some logic here. Some of this makes sense. He's surprisingly crafty. He will slip and counter. One of the best things about him is that when he does throw, he's pretty much always throwing in combination. He does hit the body. He's got a lot going on. It's not just, you can't reduce him just to the actual prettiness of the shots he lets go. I am concerned about the footwork though. I think Trinaldo a few times has surprised people by being so difficult to track down. And so devastating when you are chasing after him. And that was a bit of the kind of success that Poirier had against Ferreira when he knocked him out. I don't think Trinaldo's as big a puncher as Poirier, but he's certainly a respectable puncher. So I don't know. Does he actually have the level of craft to stay on top of Trinaldo? Well, yeah, I probably agree with you. At the very least, one of the best things I think that Ferreira does is just extending exchanges.
Yeah.
If you can't put him out, even if you hit him really clean, he's not just going to come back with a combination of punches. It's going to be a combination of punches, and then as you move away, there's going to be a kick tacked on to the end of it. He's just going to keep chasing after you. It does seem like something that's going to tax Trinaldo's gas tank. So I think you're probably right. I'll take Trinaldo as well, or Ferreira as well. But boy,
we've made enough sentimental old man picks for the day. So let's make one.
You're right.
Let's go the other way and then be proved wrong on that one as well.
You're right. Plus, while there was some there's some reason for suspicion that Trinaldo is using steroids. I'm pretty sure we know that Ferreira is because he's already been sanctioned for it. So I'm going to have faith in the banned substances. That's going to be what it takes for him to win here. Really, though, I do think there is a chance here that he's going to come chasing in with those wild flurries and just walk into some massive right hooks and left hands from Trinaldo. And otherwise have trouble catching up to him. We'll see. I think the first round will be especially interesting in a fight like this. It's going to be a wild one. Okay. How about last week, my man? What do we want to hit? Let me see how much time we have, in fact. Oh, God, none at all. We'll try and do a fairly quick recap of each of these, but the one we really had to focus on is the main event, about which we were both spectacularly wrong. Although you had the right idea before I think I helped sway you into picking Ally Quinta with me.
God damn you.
You can blame me. It's all right.
So I think for this one, there are a couple of interesting things about it, which is, firstly, was this the most complete striking performance of Donald Cerrone's career?
He looked good, man. His combinations looked good. The variety of his attacks looked good. His footwork looked so good. The way he was, there was that one moment he came in with the left uppercut and then bumped off to the side and threw it was a left hook and then he bumped off and threw a left uppercut after it and both shots landed.
Yeah.
He looked great.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that, one of the things we've discussed with Cerrone is that with reach parity, he's often forced into boxing matches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a weird way, and I never would have suspected this, but maybe he's just an immortal, because I would have expected it to kind of fuck him up in a variety of ways, going to welterweight has actually helped him, because it's forced him into reach parity in a lot of different situations. And I think that's where his boxing has really developed.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
I mean, he had, the counter left hook. Yeah, his ability to slip, take angles.
That left hook of his is entirely a post-welterweight discovery. Yep.
And so, do I think Donald Cerrone is a tremendous standalone boxer? I do not. But it's his ability he can now survive in boxing exchanges for genuinely protracted periods of time. And once it gets back, and if it's then shifting back and forth between that phase and his ability to throw kicks, then he's still a terrifying offensive threat.
Mm-hmm.
There is no one who can just hang around and let Donald Cerrone kick them on the understanding that they can effectively counter him.
Yeah.
Apart from maybe Jorge Masvidal. And that was another interesting factor for me for this one, is that I thought that Al could be analogous to Masvidal,
Mm-hmm.
but there were a couple of things that just meant that it was not so. And one of them was Masvidal's ability to catch and counter off kicks, which is, as we mentioned, superlative, and
Mm-hmm.
Al's is not. And the second is that weird Masvidal stance. It's the fact that Masvidal stands super tall, very kind of uniquely
Mm-hmm.
amongst good MMA strikers. There's a lot of bad MMA strikers that have that kind of...
Particularly ones with good wrestling.
Yeah, exactly. It's the thing that you would never expect him to have incredible takedown defense with that stance, but he still does somehow. But it also makes him much, much harder to low kick, just because he doesn't have all his weight on that front leg.
Yeah.
And so that became an issue. That became an issue for Al. I mean, even though those first two rounds were razor close, I mean, even after the first minute, I think I was just like, oh, no,
Yep.
wrong, bad pick. Even when Al would, dropped Cerrone, I was like, no, even if he wins this, I'm still not going to be happy, because he just couldn't. He was just standing 6 to 18 inches too far away the whole time.
Yeah. I had the feeling, but yeah, I agree. A minute into the fight, I was like, this is the wrong approach. It's, if Al's not stalking right from the beginning, if he's not doing what he can with that plodding footwork and that wide stance and those heavily planted feet, which is to constantly be taking small steps forward and to the side, constantly closing it off, constantly working into the pocket, then, what you said about just how truly dangerous an offensive threat Donald Cerrone is everywhere. You cannot afford to sit at this dude's kicking range for very long at all. You have to be pressing through that range. And Iaquinta just didn't pressure. I think Cerrone had a great performance. I think he deserves a lot of credit for how he prevented Iaquinta from getting back into the fight, which he was trying to do. Because Iaquinta is definitely a gutsy guy. He's had fights in the past where things have just gone wrong, and he has just bitten down and charged forward and tried to make a war out of it, because when it becomes clear that that's the only way he's going to win. And Cerrone deserves a lot of credit for basically consistently preventing Al from doing that, even down to the 5th round when Al was landing big shots. One very straightforward but underrated veteran trick Cerrone showed was, each time you tag me, I'm going to hit you really fucking hard. He did not let Iaquinta run away with any moment of success. He didn't let him build an ounce of confidence. And I think to Iaquinta's credit that he somehow remained as composed as he did throughout that entire ass kicking, which at the last 3 rounds, it really did become an ass kicking.
I thought the Sarah Longo team did a really good job of telling him ways to get back into the fight. But the thing is, Cerrone had, in some ways, he'd already disincentivized some of those approaches.
Yes.
They kept saying, right hand to the body, left hook upstairs. And at one point, he landed that combination really cleanly. It was one of his best moments. But also, Cerrone is so hard to hit level change mix-ups on. He is, that early on in the fight, there was, Al changed his level, and Cerrone just immediately just kicked him in the head.
Yep.
Just instantaneously. And, you could see Al was just like, I am genuinely not comfortable doing that again on that guy.
Yeah, and
he
that's the thing.
He do it a couple of times, but it was not enough.
I would actually I would slightly disagree, or at least augment that statement that Cerrone, I think, is in some ways very susceptible to sort of up down attacks. I always think of the left hand to the body followed by the right hook over the top that Rafa dos Anjos dropped him with in their first fight. But you have to be backing him up to do that. You know what I mean? You cannot allow him to plant his feet and kick. And it became immediately apparent in this fight that Al's limited footwork, his very plodding style, was a huge drawback, but B, that he had not effectively prepared himself to do what he could with that style of footwork. And then that Cerrone did a fantastic job of preventing him from gaining any momentum. Even just down, again, to the simple stuff of whenever Al had success, Cerrone would make sure to gun really hard to get a big moment of his own to prevent that from turning into any kind of momentum. So yeah, I mean, a phenomenal showing from Donald Cerrone. The man just won't go away, even though he's finally reached the surest sign of old age, which is that he now has George Roop hair, and literally looked like a skeleton at the weigh-ins, looked absolutely abysmal. But man, in the fight, he was spectacular. And once again, it feels like the old man strength has benefited Cerrone as well, because he seems more powerful than he ever was earlier in his career. He really, he's not slowed down much, and he really can crack these days, much more so than he ever used to. So yeah, we were dead wrong on that one, but I was, as I usually am, just happy to see Donald Cerrone defy the odds yet again. How about the rest of this card? Do we want to talk about Derek Brunson versus Elias Theodorou? Maybe the last thing we have time for.
It was amazing.
It was everything I wanted and more. It was so good.
I was seeing that with, I've got a relatively new flatmate who, also likes MMA, and we decided, we'd watch the card together, and so he had to just sit through me just hooting with laughter throughout the entirety of that fight. We got every awesome Elias Theodorou strikes, multiple standing hammer fists, the windshield wiper backhand. He did some kind of awful, tired Showtime tornado kick.
Yes.
Off the cage. Oh, it was so good.
He literally turned his back and ran away from Derek Brunson, planted his foot on the cage, and then leapt off of it to do a spinning back fist. It was what the fuck is happening? He showed his back to Derek Brunson so much in that fight, and golly, was I reminded of how truly bad Derek Brunson's footwork is. You watch Brunson's fight with Anderson Silva, you get an inkling of it. You watch his fight with Israel Adesanya, and you're like, holy shit, he has no idea how to stand or move around, which is strange because, we say this about Brunson all the time, he used to bounce around and actually cut angles and stuff, at least a little bit. He at least used to be light on his feet. I don't know how good his footwork is, but he would move. He just stands completely straight-legged and just walks out of his stance, just walks towards his opponent. He spent the entire fight basically just describing a 5 foot wide circle in the center of the octagon, while Theodorou ran the complete circuit at the very edge of the cage. They were so far away from each other for so much of this fight. And there was one moment that really just spelled the whole fight to me. Brunson finally convinced himself to charge forward. He backed Theodorou up into the fence, and then Elias Theodorou grabbed him in a clinch and had a hand on the back of his neck, a collar tie. And Derek Brunson was so threatened by what Elias Theodorou might do with that he then backed off 15 feet and went all the way back to the center of the cage. What the fuck? It was such a bad fight, but it was so good to watch.
It was amazing. It was a gift. It was everything we could have wanted. It had legitimately cool moment, one legitimately cool moment.
The slam?
Embedded in the midst of all the other absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
It was the best. If Brunson had come out and gone nuts, that would also have been good, but the fact that he did exactly what you said he would and came out looking terrified of Elias Theodorou, and that his solution to that was to plod around the cage more slowly than any non-ginger man has ever plodded around that cage.
Yeah, really gave Sam Alvey a run for his money with that footwork.
Applaud for his money.
Yes. Just a few words on Shane Burgos Cub Swanson. People were acting shocked that, I know, the scorecards were really weird. It was one of those fights where they gave a 30-27 in each direction. But It was a very close fight. I thought Cub Swanson looked good. And to Shane Burgos, I would like to say, please cut out all of the unnecessary movement you feel the need to do between each exchange. You know, like, you don't need
the
to,
jazz
like...
hands.
Yeah, the jazz hands. You don't need to be, like, doing all this little Silva-esque round, especially when you're fighting someone who is maintaining a pace with you. You know what I mean? Like, after 2 rounds of that, I was becoming frustrated with how Burgos was approaching this fight. Because he kept inviting an exchange, he would get tagged with some clean, hard jabs. And to his credit, Cub Swanson's boxing looked really sharp, at least in spots of this fight. Old as he is and everything, he had some really nice moments. And it was a kind of fight where I looked at him like, you're not getting tired, Shane Burgos. You could do a lot more than this. And he wastes a lot of time doing things that look like they are sort of mental resets for him, you know? That they're sort of little ticks that he does for comfort. And I would like to see him work those things out and to be a little more just focused on, feeling the exchanges that he's in the midst of.
I mean, I think he's still very, very good at that, considering where he is in his career.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean, this was, I think, as far as the scores go, I think 30-27 Swanson is pretty indefensible.
I would agree.
I can't imagine giving him that 3rd round for holding Burgos against the cage a bit. He got walked down and really pretty badly fucked up at the end of it. I thought Burgos did a really good job of working off using a jab to draw exchanges, and then kind of he's always had a tendency to kind of go deep into exchanges and perhaps deeper than he needs to or should. And just working off jab, counter right hand, left hook, and punctuating a lot of things with that low kick. That was, I think, what really started to break Swanson down. Yeah, is that he was constantly getting hit with combinations into low kicks.
Burgos is a pretty nasty low kicker. Even in his fight with Calvin Kattar, that's when he started to change the momentum of that bout in the 2nd round. He started to counter Kattar's jab with the inside low kick. And it looks painful. People do not like to eat that shot. He does a good job countering with it off of his head movement and also, as you said, punctuating his combinations with that move. So Burgos definitely had some moments. Swanson may be slowing down, but he's still a very crafty, experienced fighter. And Burgos did... sort of validate what I was saying last week. I can't remember if it was on here or the Vivisection, but about like the difference between a pressure fighter like him and a pressure fighter like Korean Superboy is like Swanson beat Korean Superboy basically by just deciding to stand his ground and move forward no matter what. And that is a lot harder to do against someone like Shane Burgos. He's much more defensively capable. He's much more willing to take the power off of his shots to just land with speed. And he actually makes adjustments to the person that he's fighting. He's not just a one-note swarmer.
And he's tremendously difficult to convince to force backwards.
Yeah.
I mean, absurdly so.
Yeah.
This has been one of the major problems with him, perhaps, in the Holobar and Kattar fights, is that there was never a point in those fights where he wasn't coming forward on the other guy, convinced that he was going to get them. So the thing is that Swanson would try multiple creative approaches, and Burgos just kind of ran him out of ideas, just with kind of the jab, the head movement, and the low kick. And the by the end of the fight, Swanson was just sort of he was looking kind of defeated. I will say I thought Swanson's corner was terrible.
I didn't really catch much of what they were saying. Oh God, be athletic. Oh, what does that mean?
Yeah,
I had to assume that meant something specific to Cub, like they had worked out in camp what be athletic means. But yeah, I'm like,
it really didn't seem like it.
You gotta, even if they didn't change up that advice at all. As Swanson was clearly not following it, they didn't really give him any specifics. Yeah, that was bad.
Yeah, I mean, the thing was that, he didn't have a consistent building strike like Burgos, who had 2, and so he was just kind of cycling through stuff, and sometimes cycling through stuff very cleverly, but he was just getting run out of ideas that he used the jab in bursts, and then it just disappeared again.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he landed that long right to the body. And when I saw him do that, I was like, wow, that looks like it would really work well against Burgos.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
So they weren't there to, like, call any strikes or approaches out. It was just like, this guy can't handle you when you're moving. And that, too, seemed like something which was just not true, because Burgos was just walking him down was incredibly difficult to discourage. I don't think Swanson was going to escape him.
No. Yeah. No, I didn't know what you were talking about, and then had a sudden Vietnam-esque mental flashback of hearing that phrase shouted 12 times per round and getting quietly mad about it. So, yeah. But, like, it was a fight where Cub Swanson still looks like he's got something to offer. I don't know if they'll cut him or not, but, like, Cub Swanson is a guy that I will follow to another promotion and see how he does against a lower level of competition. He definitely still had his moments and is still always fun to watch. So, good showing from Shane Burgos. Close fight. Some lessons for him to take away there, but it's still beating Cub Swanson is nothing to sniff at. All right. Well, that about does it for this week's Heavy Hands. Before we go, Phil, have you anything coming out this week?
Just a preview for I think we're just doing the main event for UFC 237 because no one cares about Silver Cannonier.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep, I'll be breaking down Namajunas Andrade with David Castillo.
All right. I will almost certainly be writing something about Namajunas Andrade as well. That's the one to care about. And in addition to, Jose Aldo, but I have already written quite a few things about Jose Aldo. I have not really, now that I think of it, written very much at all about Rose. And she's one of my favorite fighters. So I'm going to try and rectify that. And that's about it. Find us on social media, folks, with your questions, your concerns, and your comments. Twitter.com is the best place to do that. You can find Phil there at Evil Greg Jackson and myself at Boxing Bush with a B-U-S-C-H. Make sure you head over to our Patreon as well. I posted last week at the end of the month a couple boxing commentary videos, and I am planning to get back to that in the very near future with my basically analytical commentary of Canelo Alvarez versus Danny Jacobs, which I have yet to watch. So you will basically be getting my first impressions and me breaking it down as I see it for the first time. And we will see just how long I manage to keep this scam going, because they do not like having those recent fights up on any video hosting service. But I will do what I can. And if not, be looking out in the future for more classic fight commentary videos. Those are easier to get up on YouTube and everywhere else. And there's a lot of great classic fights that I would love to talk about. So, again, check out the Heavy Hands Patreon. Check us out on Twitter. Find our shit on bloodyelbow.com. And thank you very much for listening. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching, bitch, you know you came to the right place. Was that too much, Phil?
Just right.
This has been Heavy Hands.